Welcome to this edition of On Politics. I'm Dr. Eric Morrow at Tarleton State University, and we're glad you're joining us for this show today. We air right here on KTRL 90.5 FM each week, Sunday at noon, and you can also listen streaming on the internet at tarletonradio.com. If you miss any show, this one or any previous show, we have a wide range of topics that we've discussed since we've been on the air almost 2 years. You can go to SoundCloud and you can listen to all of our previous episodes. You can look up by topic, and you can also download wherever you get your podcast. So we're glad you're with us today, and we've got a great show planned talking about a number of things. In the latter part of the show, we'll get to the special session of the Texas Legislature, also talk a little bit about the Supreme Court ruling on the recent Arizona election laws. But before we do that, we want to welcome to the show today Brian Bondy, who is the Granbury Chamber of Commerce president, who began in that role on April 1st, 2021. So it's not only a challenging time, but a time of opportunity here in the COVID or post-COVID era, as we should say. He was president of the Conroe Lake Conroe Chamber of Commerce prior to that. While in Conroe, he helped grow the chamber's financial position with a combination of special event and membership development. He established the Chamber to D.C. fly-in program, where members of the chamber visited Texas senators and representatives in the nation's capital. He's been part of Chamber of Commerce work in Texas and Missouri for over 25 years, serving as a volunteer, committee member, committee chair, board member, and board officer before transitioning to this side of the desk with the Northwest Communities Chamber of Commerce in suburban St. Louis. Brian, we want to welcome you. It sounds like you've got a wealth of experience here in your work, and of course you've come to Granbury and to our region at a very critical, challenging, but opportune time, and we're glad to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation, Eric. Look forward to visiting with you this afternoon.
Well, we've had this focus in our region, and the people that listen to our show, and of course people here locally, like to hear about things local. And so it's important for us, and we often on these shows get back to a number of things, looking at education and healthcare. One area that's been very critical and always is in Texas, and I would think anywhere locally, is economics. It's the local economy. It's what's happening with businesses. It's how those resources are generating resources for public services. I mean, there's just so much connected here. And on previous shows, as I discussed with you before we went on air, we've talked to some of our business leaders here in Stephenville, the Chamber, the Small Business Development Center. And this is just a great opportunity here as we're coming out of the effects of the pandemic, and we're seeing what those actually are, what's holding or lasting, or what we're still having to deal with, and how recovery is going. And I just saw this as a great opportunity to connect with you and talk a little bit about this, of what is going on and what you see in Granbury and in the region in terms of this economic recovery, and what some of those challenges are still exist for our businesses as we look to the months and years ahead.
So Texas is in a unique position because we opened up sooner. Although the pundits said that there was going to be doom and gloom, it's been anything but that. So we have a unique opportunity before a lot of the other states in the country to get back to work. Part of the hindrance of getting back to work has been the additional unemployment benefits that were discontinued back at the end of June. And as we zero in specifically on the Granbury area, Hood County, really our biggest challenge is workforce. That is, and I think we could probably say that's going to be our challenge for some time to come, not just in Granbury and Hood County, but throughout the Metroplex. Getting people back to work is job one. Getting the right people to work, making sure that the skills line up with the jobs that are open, those are all going to be significant challenges as we move forward.
So in the middle of that, in trying to encourage a growth in workforce and making sure people are there and have the skills that they need, what are some of the the things that you're looking at as a chamber, which my understanding, and correct me here, in terms of your mission, is supporting these local businesses and connecting them with opportunities. So how does the chamber go about that effort in focusing on workforce development?
Any kind of education programs where we can piggyback with the local school district, with Tarleton, other colleges. A lot of times through Workforce Solutions, they'll have programs that we can piggyback on. And for us, it's really about letting the business community know that these resources are available. And so many times a business person is so focused with their head down trying to make the ends meet that they don't think about how can I get better employees. And so, for example, later this year, the Chamber is going to be bringing a New York Times best-selling author, Glenn Shepard, to Granbury to do a leadership and management seminar that will be targeted to small businesses. And those are the kinds of things that as we come out of the pandemic that the Chamber really has a sweet spot for.
So keeping along the same line, talking about workforce, I was on vacation the last or first part of this week. And one of the things that we noticed, especially in the hotel industry, there's a challenge there getting people on the job. And some of that then connects with customer service, which is critical for businesses and maintaining their customer base. How do you see this working in Granbury? Granbury has a lot of events, brings in people from all over the state, I would say, maybe even beyond in terms of some of the events, especially here during the summer. Is that challenged at this point in terms of customer service, of having people there available, ready to take these jobs and to help the businesses in your area accommodate for these particular events?
So Granbury is very much a tourist destination. And while 2020 was the antithesis of non-tourism, 2021 is turning out to be the breakout year for people getting out of wherever they're from, and they're coming to Granbury. And so the service businesses, as you mentioned, the hotels, the restaurants, that they are struggling to find people. And so there's now upward pressure. We're starting to see upward pressure on wages to try and entice more people to come back to work. Sign-on bonuses, stay bonuses if you get to a certain time frame. So businesses have got to think outside the box, and we're starting to see a lot more of that here in Granbury.
That's good. I mean, it's a challenging time that I think it's unprecedented, at least in our lifetime, to see something like this that has such a broad impact. But then, we've had all these debates over minimum wage and so on. And here we see the market forces pushing some of that just in the terms of the demand of labor. How, as we look ahead, so the months ahead and coming out of the pandemic, one of the things I think with the work of the Chamber, and of course chambers being connected across the state and nationally, are there programs that are still in place that maybe they were initiated during the pandemic or prior to that are a focus of yours in trying to support local businesses, resources that they can tap into, whether it's, you're talking about events that you sponsor, but we know that the federal and state governments have pushed a lot of resources, and there looks like there might be more on the horizon, at least for local governments and communities to address some issues. Are there anything still out there kind of lingering that's a focal point of trying to get resources down to local businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric. Back in May, the PPP program was shut down, which was a huge benefit for small businesses. Unfortunately, the small businesses that needed it, a lot of them were reluctant to take advantage of it. And now there is still availability of funding through the EIDL program, but that's a loan, and so you've got folks that not sure if they want to take out a loan, although at 3 3/4% interest rate, that's a pretty good opportunity to keep your business from going under. So a lot of that federal money, in terms of getting down to the local level, has kind of dried up. So where we find ourselves really trying to work together is with SBDC and SCORE and other SBA programs that are designed to help the businesses either get started and get off the ground, or hopefully to save them from going under?
Well, they're in a great place for opportunity there in Granbury. As you know, we've discussed this before. I've assisted with the debate with the mayoral candidates and the city council candidates, and a lot of the attention there was focused on this economic and demographic growth that's happening in Granbury. Within that context, you know, and looking at some of the challenges there and local governments working together with the chamber and with businesses and so on. What do you see are some of the challenges ahead in not just the economic growth? We know that's being driven by a lot of this, but being able to accommodate that. I know a lot of the things that were focused with the questions were about how the city functions in relation to handling growth and being able to manage it. On the business side, you know, some would say there's never too much growth is not enough, right? It's but it can be, right, if you can't meet all the demand that you need to. So somewhere in there is a balance, and I would think you have your eye on that at the chamber. And how do you navigate that? How do you have a really important role with the city and with other local governments and with your small businesses in navigating that potential growth that's ahead?
Yeah, so in my line of work, there's only two kinds of communities, those that are growing and those that aren't. And one of the challenges for a growing community is infrastructure, whether it's water, wastewater, power, transportation. These are all core issues that you can't just wave a magic wand and they go away. So we're talking about something that has been dealt with for the past 25 or 30 years. It's going to be dealt with for the next 50 years. I mean, it's not something that ever goes away. Specifically as it relates to the city of Granbury, as we heard at the candidate forum, wastewater is a very hot topic here. As the community has grown, the existing treatment facility isn't capable of doing what it's supposed to do, and another one is going to need to be built. Now, where that ends up remains to be seen. But that's an issue that isn't just a 1 or 2 year issue. That's a long-term issue. Same thing with 377. That's our main corridor through town. And yet, if you look on any given evening at 5 o'clock, it looks more like Houston than it does Granbury because of the cars that are lined up. At some point, TxDOT's going to have to come to the table and accelerate the timeline to make that road safer and more accessible for people coming and going.
So big challenges, but also good ones, I think, to have, maybe with the growth that you're seeing in Granbury. Part of that growth is usually targeted at attracting additional businesses. I've lived in Brownwood, which had that focus for a number of years, being where it's located. Of course, Stephenville with its growth and looking at that as well. What is the role of the chamber in that process? I know you've got some things. I mean, I come over there to visit some of your hardware lumber establishments on a regular basis because there's always something I can't find here in Stephenville that's in Granbury. So a little bit envious on that side of it, but you already have some of that you would see as essential to a community and providing the kinds of retail that people want. They're going to move to an area or they want to have proximity to. Are there other things on the horizon, the types of businesses, things that are looked at, or is it also the fact that you're being watched by certain corporations that say, hey, we see the traffic, we see the growth, we want to see about locating at some point in the future?
Yeah, so we are very fortunate. My predecessor, Mike Scott, built an economic development platform where the city and the county contribute a specific amount of money each year, and the chamber runs that economic development for them. And Shay Hopkins is our economic development vice president, and she is exceptionally well connected. And in a year and a half, because we kind of lost some of the momentum with COVID, we've been able to close over $205 million in new capital investment. Now remember, you don't incentivize retail. Retail is going to follow rooftops, and rooftops are coming here. What you want to try and do in any good economic development program is attract either capital investment that has very little impact on infrastructure, or jobs that bring people, high-paying jobs that bring people who live here, work here, play here. That's kind of where we're focused right now, those two areas. And to be able to have a $205 million capital investment in about 20 months of work is unbelievably successful, and it indicates the value that this community has in its part of the Metroplex.
That's great to hear. That's phenomenal too. And thinking about even in this COVID era with all the challenges that are happening. One question that goes back to that just briefly, because I know a lot of this is looking at how businesses have adapted and coming out of the pandemic. Of course, a lot was focused on technology, and that was a question I remember asking the chamber president here was how the chamber was helping during the pandemic to businesses that had not used technology to the extent where they could connect with their customer base. What do you see other trends like that coming out of the pandemic and moving ahead, that where businesses are adapting in different ways that they've found successful and they know that they may hold on to some of those things going forward?
What we found specifically as it relates to the chamber is that our membership has a wealth of knowledge on different topics, and we started utilizing them as subject experts in producing programming, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. So for us, that's a model that we can continue. We can tap into a ready stream of people who know everything from retail to logistics, transportation, and everything in between. And why shouldn't we? That's part of what our job is to not only help promote the community, but help promote our members' businesses. And I think you're going to see chambers of commerce do more of these kinds of things and look for ways to not only generate new sources of revenue, but also provide more added value for that member's investments.
Very good. Yes, I saw some of that as well and attended some different things where it seemed like the focus became much more about the community, about how to help each other through this crisis, and what resources, knowledge that people had that they could share, in the chamber becoming a very crucial part of that in connecting people. And I see that certainly going forward as well. Looking to your program, what the chamber's doing in Granbury, you mentioned about people now traveling, the tourism growing. We're looking at the fall semester that we think we'll be doing double time here with people trying to make up with events and things that they didn't get to do last year.
Very much so.
What is the plans with the chamber? What do you have coming up, and what are some of the focal points that you have in helping local businesses, but also being a critical part of what's happening in Granbury?
So we like to consider ourselves Granbury's front door. And there was a time, 10, 15 years ago where the foot traffic in and out of a chamber's office was constant every single day. Folks traveling, stopping at the chamber, pick up this, pick up that. And today our front door is our website. And so one of the things that when I got here, our team said, we need to take a hard look at where we're at. And to that end, our board supported, that's the word I was looking for, we're in the front end of rebranding the chamber. New logo, website, marketing materials, because we want to position ourselves to that next generation of business owners. And it's not something that we have previously done. We know that the boomers are aging out of the workforce at a rapid rate. Xers and Yers are coming up, and millennials and Gen Zs are right in behind, and they don't necessarily know the value of a chamber of commerce. We will be spending a lot of time appealing to that market and helping them understand why it's a good investment for them and their business. Looking at providing benefits for membership levels, things that we haven't done in the past, not because we were ignorant to it, but because we didn't have to. We were benefiting from just being where we're at. Now it's a real competitive market. You've got Stephenville, you've got Cleburne, Benbrook. So we need to position ourselves as an organization that's not your dad's or granddad's chamber of commerce, that we're on the edge of change, and we want to be a change agent for our businesses.
So on that note, this show has a strong focus on civic engagement. How do we connect with the listener out there, with the average person, in terms of current issues and that are going on around them, whether they're economic, political, intertwined, as we see many of them are. I know a lot of your messaging and focus is on businesses and connecting people, but I know you also engage with the public. I mean, I saw that through the forum that you provided. How do you communicate that to kind of the average person of the significance and role of the chamber and what they should know about a chamber of commerce and its important a place within a community like yours?
Yeah, that's a great question because in the bygone years, we really didn't worry too much about messaging to the public. It really was just an internal message that we were trying to get across, through things like the forums that we do for elections. It's a very important role for the Chamber of Commerce. Advocacy is rapidly becoming the number one reason why businesses join the Chamber, because we can provide access to those candidates, whether it's at the local level, county, state, federal level. That is a unique opportunity that Chambers of Commerce can parlay. I think the other part of that, though, is in the events that we hold. This past weekend is probably the best example. The Chamber has for decades put on the annual 4th of July celebration. The vendors on the square, the parade on Saturday, the fireworks on the 4th, that's all a chamber-driven event that the public sees a direct benefit from without necessarily investing in it themselves. So the more we do to make those kinds of things more visible, more accessible, more appealing, the more likely they are to say, well, what's that organization up to now? Because I remember they did this last year and it wasn't nearly this good, or whatever the case might be. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's in the role that you have and in terms of understanding that engagement with critical issues that are impacting the community, especially economic, businesses, types of services, things that are available to people. I mean, I think that's important for everyone to know about. That what does the Chamber of Commerce do? I mean, what opportunities do they provide? How engaged are they in the community? And I think that's great in terms of that event opportunity provides you with that, and as well as your visibility. I think that's very important because people need to know that, one, the Chamber's not government, right? I mean, that's
correct.
Right. And sometimes that I think that gets confused. That people don't understand how a community really takes these different, both government, non-government entities and organizations, and whether they're economic focused or religious or culturally focused, that it's all of this together that really makes a community whole. This is a show on politics. I'm not going to ask you a blatantly political question here, but one of my areas that I enjoy so much and I work with students is in the realm of public policy. And so I do have to ask, we just had a session of the state legislature. Congress work is ongoing with looking at various packages that may or may not pass that may have impact on a broad level. Is there anything going on or that came out of the session, anything that you see that has had a significant impact on what a Chamber of Commerce does, or what resources are out there for businesses? I know we mentioned a few things that had been in place, but just as the newspaper industry and other groups, watch those sessions to see what happens. I didn't know if there was anything that had happened in this previous session or that's on the horizon that you're following.
This particular session, as it relates to the business community, was relatively quiet. Now, the special session will bear to really pay attention to what's going to get done. It's a long list. It's an aggressive list. I'll be surprised if they get 3 or 4 of those things accomplished in the 30 days. And, we think that there's probably going to be at least 1 and possibly 2 more special sessions if ultimately those list of items that the governor wants the legislature to address actually get addressed. For us, probably the biggest one that didn't get handled in the legislature was the reauthorization of Chapter 313, which is really more of a tool in the tool belt for economic development. Maybe not so much here in Granbury, but for communities that have a large industrial customer that could make a huge investment, not having the ability to put together a program through Chapter 313 becomes more challenging for them. Our hope is that they'll take a look at that, and I have a feeling that the TEDC and other state trade groups are paying attention to it as well.
Sure. Yeah, we know that special sessions are times for bargains, and you never know what somebody will throw on the table to get ultimately the outcome they want, but know that they're going to have to agree to some other things as well. And this is where it comes down to with the governor and the legislature in terms of what they want to get out of this. And so it'll be interesting to see. But yes, I know it's probably good that it was somewhat of a quiet session in that I think the focus was on just not inhibiting economic recovery, since, as you said at the beginning, it was really already underway in Texas with opening back up. Again, we're seeing it, I think, all across the state. Well, Brian, I want to thank you for joining us today. This is very engaging in terms of understanding the role of the Chamber of Commerce and the work that you're doing in your area and in Granbury. We'd certainly like to have you back in the future as we see things grow there and change, especially with the infrastructure issues, because those are where often the political side of it connects with the economic and is very critical in our communities. So thank you again for joining us today.
Eric, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show and look forward to visiting with you again real soon.
All right, that's Brian Bondy, the president of the Granbury Chamber of Commerce, talking about that chamber and the work that's going on there in Granbury, and of course broader issues coming out of the pandemic. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we will be back with more On Politics.
T for Texas is a Texas-based history podcast from historian Dr. T. Lindsay Baker. Find a new episode every Thursday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to On Politics. I'm Dr. Eric Morrow. We're glad you're joining us here today on KTRL 90.5 FM. We had in the first half of the show an interview with Brian Bondy, the president of the Granbury Chamber of Commerce, and we also discussed a number of issues related to the chamber there, but also to the economic recovery post-pandemic. We want to give you the website for the Granbury Chamber. That's granburychamber.com. So if you want to learn more about the Granbury Chamber of Commerce and what they're doing in that community and the role that the chamber has, then take a look at that website. They've got a lot of information on there about their different programs and the things that they offer to the community. And of course, we'll be following many of these issues and discussing them in the future as we go forward in looking at the recovery from the pandemic. Also, I want to talk about a couple of other issues today on the show, as I mentioned at the very beginning. And one was that the Texas Legislature is back in session. And so they went back into session this past week, called by the governor of the state to deal with a number of different issues. And the special session, why it is happening? Well, the Texas Tribune has a great article, which I'll post on our Facebook page. That's On Politics with Eric Morrow. And it goes through a number of the different issues that are going to be covered during that session in terms of what is on the agenda. Now, a special session in Texas is only 30 days. It has to be called by the governor. The governor sets the agenda for that session. And so Governor Abbott, in calling the special session, put 11 items, which, as Brian said in our previous interview, was a very aggressive agenda. There's a lot of things here that probably will not make it through the special session. Everything from bail overhaul to elections, which we'll talk more about in a moment, funding for border security, as Governor Abbott, and we've talked about on this show, has been critical of the Biden administration in terms of federal resources available at the Texas border with Mexico, social media censorship, legislative branch funding, which probably will get passed, that funds the offices and the committees and the legislators, family violence prevention, limiting access to school sports teams for transgender students, abortion-inducing drugs, an additional payment for retired Texas teachers, critical race theory, which we covered a few weeks ago, and other budgetary issues. So yes, very aggressive agenda. Of course, out of the starting gate was the return to debate over revising election laws in the state of Texas. This was the Senate Bill 7, that was on the table, and Democrats walked out at the last minute, preventing a quorum and the ability to pass that bill. And of course, Governor Abbott right away said that it would be on the top of the list for a special session. And so that has already begun. The debate on that began this past week when the session opened on Thursday. A different committee chair, a different focus here to try to see if they can navigate this. Also, pressures being put on Texas Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate to go along with this, to work together for a particular outcome, and of course threats to say don't walk out again, don't do some of the things and use some of the tactics that you used before. Of course, at the center of this, and I won't revisit this too much because it was a focus of a show that we had with Dr. Marcy Reynolds, and that is putting more restrictions on options available to local elections administrators to be able to facilitate the election. So some of the attention is being given to the 24-hour voting sites. Another is to ballots being sent out by mail, and extended hours of the drive-through voting. What the legislature has been looking at is trying to standardize more of these practices across the state and put kind of boundaries on it. What at one time had been the opportunity for local election officials to extend different options and opportunities as long as election integrity could be affirmed. That's been one of the focal points here, is that election security is the focus of one side, or we might say elections integrity, right? Maintaining the fact that elections are free of any kind of pressure, that people are able to vote as they can, that fraud is prevented. On the other side are those who are looking at voting accessibility. And that is, are we providing enough opportunity and ways in which people can use their right to vote? And so this has become a major issue across the United States, of course, reaching the Supreme Court with a decision that came down on the Arizona laws that were under review, one a statutory law regulation, and another a House bill that was passed related to, these were related to two areas. One was in what they call ballot harvesting, where ballots were collected up in a certain area. This was done at times by campaign officials or by others that were not either postal workers or election officials. So it tightened that up to say that only election officials or postal workers could gather ballots. The other in this focus on election laws is voting in precinct. So on election day, they had a requirement that you had to vote in your precinct. You couldn't go to another precinct. And if you did vote in another precinct, the election officials had the right under the law to discard that ballot because it was not cast in the right precinct. Now, these are some common practices across the United States in terms of how elections are conducted. And essentially what the Supreme Court decision said, the majority, was that not only should states be responsible for administering their elections, they should be the ones to determine how they conduct those elections, knowing that there is going to be some modest imposition, right? People are going to have to go vote somewhere, or they're going to have to show ID, or they're going to have to vote in their precinct. That there have to be some limits on flexibility here and some imposition in order to ensure the integrity of an election, and that this was not such an obstacle to the opportunity to vote. And again, this is coming from the majority opinion of the Supreme Court that upheld the two laws in Arizona. That election security is certainly important. Preventing fraud is certainly important. exercising the right to vote is important, but on the other hand, the state is not able to accommodate every specific need or means that would make voting more accessible. I mean, again, I think we're pushing now the debate about where is the threshold of that? Where do you find the balance between accessibility and then creating an undue burden on someone in terms of exercising their right to vote? So we're in that kind of gray area, whereas you have some on the ideological side of this that would say that any burden is a challenge. Well, we know in this day and age, in order to have security, there is going to have to be some burden. In order to make sure that elections are free of fraud or outside influence, that there is going to have to be a burden because things have to be checked. They have to be verified. We have to assure that people who are voting are actually registered voters. And what we also see in all of this is the challenges going forward when you don't have tremendous amount of data on either side that supports one or the other. It's navigating now an area that is more influenced, and this is where we get into the challenges of it, by the politics of it all, the partisanship. As we've said on previous shows, coming out of that 2020 presidential election, when you had this focus put on the outcome, when you had many who were saying, well, there has to be something that was either wrong about this or that set this up for this result to happen with Joe Biden being elected. And so the attention then began to turn to voting practices, especially in a pandemic era where there were a lot of modifications made to facilitate voting, extending early voting, voting by mail, extending that as well, drive-through voting. There were just many practices that were used that were different from what had been done in the past, that expanded the ways in which people could vote, but then also now are raising concerns about the potential for fraud, or that some with an ulterior motives may use this with their agenda to try to commit fraud in order to influence the outcomes of elections. So all of this is, though, being looked at and debated in a political environment that has people kind of set up on each side. I mean, again, the mainstream in both sides, I think we have to make this clear and say this, is that the majority wants secure elections. There's no disagreement on that. The majority want people to vote who have the right to vote. Again, agreement on that. It's where the emphasis is being placed on how the laws are being developed, how they're being reviewed and implemented in terms of this tremendous political pressure. So here you have people who've been elected to office. They're being pressured by those back in their districts to say, we have to fix this. The election did not turn out the way we wanted it to. That means there must have been something wrong. We've got to address it, thus this additional scrutiny. My argument has been that all of this really covers over the more practical aspects of carrying out elections, and that is there's a tremendous cost on the taxpayers to ensure the security of elections, and that the more variety of ways that you offer to vote, the more that cost increases. And so you're not able to, the state is not able to say we must provide every way possible to vote to accommodate every certain group that would need that accommodation. Whether we're talking about minorities or people with disabilities and so on. Yes, there's a certain degree of accommodation that we need to go to that makes sense and that's reasonable, but not every accommodation could be made that would not create a burden for someone to vote. This is what the Supreme Court is pointing out, is that there is going to be some imposition on voters in this day and age, especially when we're talking about the challenges in securing elections, that they're going to have to follow. And then what they're saying is that it's up to the states to look at that. Now, of course, it leaves open the possibility of reviewing laws based on discrimination. And this is what the other side is saying, that the minority on the court that voted, that ruled against this, the Arizona laws, they're saying that, wait a minute, this is moving back in that direction where we start to put more imposition on voters, and knowing that this in the past was used to discriminate against certain groups of people by race or ethnicity, that we're going back to an era that the Voting Rights Act was intended to end by giving intense scrutiny to changes in election laws, especially if they put requirements on voters so this has been the debate about voter ID, about limiting options for mail-in voting, absentee voting, voting on election day. And this debate will continue on that level, because you have those who are going to say that any action by the state to restrict voting means or methods that does adversely affect, and this is what they're saying, it adversely affects a particular group. So let's look at Houston, where we have large minority populations when compared with the population of the state, that the intent here is we need more flexibility in order to accommodate lack of transportation or lack of resources to get to voting or to get a voter ID, people who work different shifts, and thus the 24-hour polling sites, the drive-through, and so on. So again, all of this debate at that level really does not have the data, and some of this we don't want the data. Do we want data on widespread voter fraud? Well, the data is not there, and that's good, but that means that we still need to continue to be vigilant about preventing fraud. On the other side, do we have discriminatory practices? Some would say that we still do, and this is again a challenge, but are these laws intended to discriminate? And again, the Supreme Court, the majority ruled that this was not the case with the Arizona laws. Could states do more to facilitate voting? Yes, if in Arizona that collections of ballots is difficult in Native American tribal groups and in rural areas where driving to a post office is difficult or mail service is not fully available, then do we need election workers to go and pick up ballots? There needs to be some balance here that's found that maintains election integrity, but also does not, again, cause tremendous expense on the part of the state in order to think that every which way voting can be done needs to be provided to accommodate those particular needs or variations of challenges that would be considered an imposition on voters. So it'll be interesting going forward. Now that they've ruled on the Arizona laws, it's most certain that other laws will be coming forward, may continue to be challenged. The Georgia laws are already in the courts and being challenged on the basis that they discriminate against African Americans in voting. But again, is the Supreme Court now with a majority, as it ruled in this decision, in a position that will say, no, we're going to leave this up to the states. If we see no intent to discriminate, then it's up to the states to manage their election systems, to determine the boundaries, to determine what might be an imposition on voters, but also in a way to maintain election security. There's always going to be the political side to this as well. While we had seen voting expanded in terms of opportunities and means and ways of voting, this is going to become even more political based on the outcomes of elections, both state and national. So we don't see the partisanship part of this diminishing in any way, and it may swing as state legislatures change. It may swing depending on who's gets elected. If that changes in the 2024 election, we could see this become a non-issue by that point because of the push that is happening now versus what may be the issues of voting at that point in time. So it's something that we're going to continue to watch because it's not only happening here in Texas, but it's happening around the country. The Supreme Court's now involved. It's becoming more complex and more challenging in terms of a current political issue in our state and in our country. And so we'll give this more attention as we move forward and we see how these other election laws, as they are passed by states, move through the court system, how they connect, especially here in Texas, with the Supreme Court decision on the Arizona law. I think also what's driving this, and just to kind of conclude this kind of commentary on what's happening with election laws, I think part of what's driving this as well is a shift in giving the states back more of that responsibility and having the Supreme Court have that role of interpreting the lines of constitutionality, which is what they do. But in this case is that if it's not very clear in terms of impact, that this is undue impact on a particular group, that discrimination is not the intent, that it is part of the process of states fulfilling their constitutional role to manage elections, that they're going to leave this with the states. That seems like the trend for the foreseeable future. So it puts these other cases, the Georgia case and potentially what could come out of Texas, in jeopardy for challenges under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, because the Supreme Court is pulling back from this and pulling the law back to then leave it in the hands of the states to manage their elections. That's what happened when Section 5 was dismissed in the Shelby case in 2013, when the Supreme Court released the 15 states and areas around the country that were still under the Voting Rights Act and required the Department of Justice to review any changes to election laws in those states or regions. So that, of course, opened the door now for states to make more adjustments on their own without having DOJ review, and leading to, of course, the response after the 2020 election. So I think that is driving this. States want that. They want more control over these processes. They don't want to continually be beholden to the federal government. They want to be able to manage it. As long as we have an election system, which I think for election security is critical, where it's every state in and of itself that manages its elections, then I think that this will be the trend in the near future, in that states will have much more say and much more direction over how they manage election laws and how those laws stand and are applied within those states. So stay tuned for more of that. We'll get into more details as we see this progress in Texas, to see where it goes in terms of the courts and what challenges will come. Now, that's not the only thing on the agenda in the special session. It's the one thing that's up front and center because it was a focal point of the governor, of the Speaker of the House, and of the lieutenant governor. And so now we're moving into to see in the next few weeks where this goes. How will it be addressed? Will they be able to find some compromise there, or be able to move this through where they were not able to before? I went through the list of other things, and we'll track these as they come up. So in the shows in the weeks ahead, we'll look at the different issues. Some of them, like I said, we had already discussed, including border security and critical race theory. The one thing that got left off that's getting a lot of media attention is that the special session does not include anything about the state's electric grid, especially with a recent report that showed that we had a number of power plant failures in the month of June. So we have seen what happened in February with the winter storm. We have seen some challenges already early on in the early summer months, but this could be added at some point. I think the governor's probably waiting to see if some signature issues can be addressed. How much push is to get this on the agenda? Will this move to a second special session this summer, knowing that we will have a redistricting special session in the near future once the census data is available for drawing the maps for the next round of elections. So electric power grid is another critical issue that we may see in terms of Texas managing this on its own, and seeing how it will manage this with both state and corporate resources, private resources in this partnership in the near future. The other couple of things that I just wanted to bring up about this special session, this will be what I said at the end of my interview with Brian Bondy, is that there's a lot of bargaining that goes on in these sessions. While the governor can determine the issues that will be up for focus, there's a lot that is brought to the table and outcomes that both the legislature and the governor want to achieve. And so one of the things when you're looking at special sessions is to watch what issues, auxiliary issues, do come up, or related issues that will be a part of those political outcomes, and whether those have an impact on that outcome or not. Because everyone goes into these politically with things that they want to accomplish, things just like with a regular legislative session, that they want to go back to their constituents and say, hey, look at what we did in this session. Remember, this is the last session before the 2022 elections, other than the special sessions. And this is what the accomplishments or the things that people will run on in that next election. And so it's very, very critical that they are able to get their imprint on this session, the regular session and the special sessions, in order to show that they're working on behalf of their constituents. So watch this in the weeks ahead. You can go to the Texas Tribune. You can go to the Austin American-Statesman. You can go to any of your major regional newspapers, Dallas, Fort Worth, all have special sections that track the politics in the state and that are looking at this special session and what outcomes may happen. I want to thank you for joining us this week on politics. We were glad to have Brian Bondy, president of the Granbury Chamber of Commerce, to join us. And please look at his website, granburychamber.com, for more information on the Granbury Chamber and the programs and the things that they offer in that city and in the region. We also thank you for joining us each week right here, 12 noon on Sundays on KTRL 90.5 FM. Check us out on Facebook for related articles. Listen to previous shows on SoundCloud and join us again next week. Thank you.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from me, Taylor Welch, and me, Brianna Blanks.
Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.